Hi everyone, Matthew DeSantis here with NYRA Bets, here with a very special video to talk about this Saturday's big races taking place out at Santa Anita, including the Grade 1 California Crown. Want to make sure to stay on and watch this as we preview the 4 graded stakes races on Saturday's card at Santa Anita. I have a very special guest joining me in a moment. Before that, make sure to press that like button and subscribe to the NYRA Bets YouTube channel to get all of our race previews, full card analyses, handicapping and betting tutorials, and so much more. Well, listen, when I think California, I think of my very, very good friend Gino Buccola. And so that's why I got to bring on my man G to talk about these races taking place out at Santa Anita. Gino, thanks so much for joining me. And what is going to be a really exciting Saturday of races, including 2 Breeders' Cup winner-ins and a Grade 1 out at Santa Anita.
Yeah, and they're trying to make this an on-track event to an experience. They want it to be sort of like the Pegasus World Cup Day. There's going to be tons of live music, a bunch of really great food, drinks all over, but the stuff that we care most about, quality racing. They bump the purses up to try to attract some more horses to these fields. And while the California Crown isn't necessarily a field of 10 or 11, I think we have 5 Grade 1 winners in there, Matt. So there's some real strength at the top. The other California Crown races before, the fields are bigger, which is nice. So we'll probably have some great betting opportunities. And when you think about the layout of the calendar right now, all these races have major Breeders' Cup implications. That's a big key, right? You're watching these races this weekend, and you're going to be seeing horses that are probably going to be running now for their final time before hopefully going on to the Breeders' Cup in just about 5-6 weeks, not even, down at Del Mar.
Yeah, it's crazy how quickly that's caught up to us. I feel like we just ended Saratoga, and now I feel like I'm underprepared for the Breeders' Cup somehow, as it's just right around the corner at Del Mar. And you're right; these are kind of those final prep races. Whether you're talking about the races taking place up here in New York this weekend, next week, whether you're talking about Keeneland and some of the races we'll see for those 2-year-olds in particular, the Alcibiades and the Breeders' Futurity, and then obviously out at Santa Anita. You mentioned some of those turf races as part of this California Crown card, and nice fields. I mean, a couple of 11-horse fields we'll talk about, some big fields, a lot of opportunity, I think, for value. So let's dive into it and talk about the first of these 4 graded stakes races. And we'll start with John Henry Turf, going 1.25 miles down the hill for 3-year-olds and up. As Grade 2 race, field of 11. Now, here's the interesting thing, I think, for me, Gino, is that a lot of the horses that I think people would naturally look toward, a horse like Gold Phoenix or Balnikov, they're on the far outside. They don't necessarily have the greatest post position for this sort of thing. They're going to have to find a way to save some ground. But it does feel like a really interesting field because you have some names that we're very familiar with on the East Coast. Rock Emperor, Masterpiece, who have now kind of become West Coast horses. So interesting. And I'm curious to hear where your thoughts were in this particular race.
And you were kind of hitting on with both Gold Phoenix and Balnikov. They'll probably be 2 of the top contenders that take a lot of money. Both of them aren't really fast early either. Right? They're mid-pack to deep closers. I mean, Gold Phoenix was sitting closer in the most recent race because they were going so slow in that race. I think he was sitting like 3rd, 4th early on, but they were going 51 and change to the half mile. So that's why he was much closer. Balnikov is a deep closer as well. Those 2 are the horses they'll all have to hold off. They're probably the horses to beat, but not necessarily the horses to bet. Matt, we're always looking for horses that could offer a little more value. For me, there were 1 or 2 really interesting horses. I thought the one that will absolutely be on my pick 4s, pick 5s, any exotics, and a little bit of a plug, all of the wagering menu for the special California Crown races are at californiacrown.com, the website, and they're all 15% takeout, all of them. All of the special wagers on californiacrown.com. Some of them are all stakes pick 4. There's an all stakes pick 5. There are 2-day wagers. There are doubles. And all of those are 15% takeout, which is awesome for us bettors. Matt, I like the 3 a little bit in here. Devon Propos. This is a horse who you go through his form overall. He has not done much wrong in his entire career. And I know by speed figures, he's a little below some of the top contenders in here, but he really seems like he's improving. He's still a 4-year-old that's lightly raced. I think he's getting better. You look at his 3 races in the U.S. He came in to the United States in June, had not raced since September of last year when we last saw him in France. He won off a very long layoff, which is really impressive. Then he came back on July the 21st. He got hooked 3 wide all the way around. He was out in the 5 path at the top of the lane, and he kept trying, Matt. He was only beaten 3/4 of a length that day, even though the trip was a no chance kind of trip. He came back in his next start. Again, he took a little step forward. He was sitting a nice trip, just a few lengths off. He really wanted to go too. He was kind of keen. That's the thing about him. He wants to go. If they can get him just to settle right behind the lead, I know the horse isn't quite as good as he used to be, but Awfully Naughty is the horse that Devon Propos just defeated. And when you look through the form lines of a lot of these horses, you see Gold Phoenix, who will probably be the favorite in here. On the bottom of the page, he got defeated by Awfully Naughty. So again, you're just playing that common rival game. Maybe Divine Propos is a little lesser on the buyers or on the speed figures, whatever you're using. But as far as a horse that's lightly raced, tactical speed, on the upswing, and maybe a little better than the speed figures would suggest, I think this is a horse who could offer you some value in here, Matty.
Yeah, listen, I mean, he's also, we know this from New York, the other Chad is always the way to go. And the other D'Amato can sometimes be the way to go out west on the turf as well. And so trainer Phil D'Amato brings this one here. And you have to also think about intent as well. The fact that Phil is moving this horse up into a pretty aggressive spot off of 3 straight allowance optional claiming races
against his other big boys, right? He's got Gold Phoenix in here. He knows Gold Phoenix has got to be one of the top horses in the barn. You're not going to throw a horse like this to the wolves if you don't think he can go out there and at least be competitive with that horse.
100%. And he's got Antonio Frezu up on the mount, who's one of his regular jockeys. And yeah, and the thing is, it's not as if this horse, you mentioned he likes to go, but he's shown the ability to rate.
Yep.
And so it's not as if he's entered to be a rabbit somehow in this race. And so you have to really take him on his own accounts. He was one that I was attracted to as well quite a bit in this spot. I think he's an interesting horse. One that, now a horse that I will be using probably more underneath, but Dicey Mo Chara really impressed me last time out just because he did something he almost never does, which is he went straight to the lead. Now, you mentioned those really slow fractions, and they tried to take advantage of it. Hector Barrios, who was aboard that day, really tried to steal it on the front end and basically go, listen, if you guys are going to let me walk the dog this slow, then I'm just going to go straight to the front. I'm going to try to wire the field. That's not really his game. He usually tries to sit a little bit more, sits a little bit more of a mid-pack trip, can kind of stalk and track, but that's one, he just doesn't really get the job done winning as much as you'd like. Only 4 for 25 winning, hasn't actually won since 2022, believe it or not. So you have to go back quite a way, but incredibly consistent horse that just kind of shows up and usually shows up at a little bit of a decent price sometimes. Finished second 2 back in the Ed Reed at 76-1. So sometimes you can find a big price there on a horse like Dicey Mo Chara, but
yeah, and Matty, just while you're talking about Dicey Mo, what is such a positive about him is you just look at the last 2 races in particular. Yeah. I would say I think Balnikov is probably a better horse than Dicey Mo Chara overall with a higher ceiling. But with Dicey Mo Chara's running style, you can see that the last 2 races, Dicey Mo Chara faced Balnikov, finished in front of Balnikov, mainly because he's able to get the jump on him. Balnikov will have to come from dead last. Sometimes you get stuck. You're in traffic. You're at the mercy of the pace shape. And that's not really an issue for Dicey Mo Chara in a spot like this. He can put himself in the race. He doesn't have to be on the lead. He just ended up there because there was nobody else that really wanted it. But he will get the jump on the Gold Phoenix and the Balnikovs and some of those deeper closers. So I have no problem with anyone wanting to include him in a pick 4, pick 5, or any of the multis because he's the type of horse who could really fall into it. He could trip out and just get that nice jump on everyone else. And sometimes it doesn't look pretty. You see the horses in the back, they're winding up. You feel like they're going to come, but Dicey Mo just gets there. That's all that matters is just getting to the wire first.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, another horse that I just will very quickly mention that I'm intrigued by, and I don't know how I'm going to be using this horse, and I'm going to be interested to see what the morning line is and kind of what the betting price is, but I'd imagine this horse is going to be a pretty big price, and that is El Encinal for Francisco Garcia. And the reason I bring this horse up is second back from a significant layoff after coming up from Argentina. Didn't run from December 2023 until just recently in August at Del Mar in the Del Mar handicap, where he finished 6th behind Gold Phoenix, Dicey Mo, Balnikov, etc. But now we're second back. we're coming off a nice workout at Santa Anita, going 48-1 in 4 furlongs. So good to see the horse probably has a little bit more foundation, maybe a little bit more pep in the step this time out. And, we've seen horses come up from Latin America. We're going to talk about one a little bit later, Subsanador, who I know you're a little bit high on. We've seen another horse like Didia, obviously, in recent years for Ignacio Correas IV, come up from Latin America and do quite well. I don't know. That one's going to be a big price. And I could see this horse improving second start in North America.
What's nice about him, they had a plan. This horse qualified for the Breeders' Cup in December of last year.
Yes.
He won a win in your in race for the Breeders' Cup. So with that in mind, as of December 16th of last year, they knew what the plan was for this horse all year long. Hey, we want to be peaked for the Breeders' Cup. So let's not really worry about the first half of the year. Let's travel out to the United States, to North America. Let's get a couple races under us before the Breeders' Cup. That's exactly what they're going to be able to do. They run in the Del Mar handicap just to run around the track, honestly. You're not even looking at the finish of that race and taking anything out of it. You're looking, oh, you know what? The horse at least was able to show some tactical speed. It was not like he was outrun against a group like this or anything. He was in the race. He's going to build up a lot of fitness off of that, shake off some of the rust. Now, second start back, he'll be even fitter. And if you see a little step forward from him, he's definitely a horse you want to keep on your radar for the Breeders' Cup as a horse you could at least use on the bottom of exotics, because he's now been in Southern California for 4 or 5 months at that point. He's already got a race at Del Mar under him, so he knows the track and he knows that turf course. I like when horses when connections have a plan for a horse, and they did with this one. This was the plan. Give him the time off. We've got 3 targets now at the end of the year leading into the Breeders' Cup. We saw the first one out of the way. Now this is part 2 of the 3-part plan. And I, like you, I'm expecting a step forward, because while I do respect Gold Phoenix and Balnikov, these are the types of horses with their running style that at shorter prices, you are okay taking a shot against.
Yeah.
You really are, because you just feel like there are so many ways for them to get beat with traffic, with pace shape, with getting hooked a little bit wide, with things not having to go perfectly for deep closers. It doesn't have to be that way for a horse like El Encino, who might be able to just sit much closer.
Absolutely. No, couldn't agree more. It's going to be an interesting race, and will be interesting to see how the public bets this race. Of course, one of the things that I do want to note is that we have Flavian Pratt is coming out to Southern California along with Johnny Velasquez and a couple of guys who have been riding here in New York, but Pratt is going to be out riding Balnikov. So obviously make sure to take note of that. Obviously all of his mounts always alive. And it's interesting because he could have stayed in New York and run Silver Knot, who is Charlie Appleby's horse running in the Turf Classic out here at Belmont at the Big A. Dylan Davis ultimately ends up on that horse, who's kind of ended up becoming a jockey that's being used by Charlie Appleby a little bit more when others are not available. So interesting to see just the decision-making by Pratt to go out to California. He's got a couple of big mounts throughout the afternoon on the California Crown Day for sure. But let's move to the next of these stakes races, and that is the Eddie D Stakes, grade 2, 6.5 furlongs, going on the downhill for 3-year-olds and up. And this one is a little bit of an interesting race because you and I both know we've talked about Santa Anita all the time, from our time doing stable duel stuff to all the way following it. And the 6.5 down the hill is always a little bit different. Yeah. You generally like to find horses that are comfortable going a little bit longer, or that you just find these horses that are downhill specialists, quite frankly. It's interesting, a horse like Big Invasion on the far outside, the number 11 coming in from the East Coast for Christophe Clement, ran very well at last year's Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint. That was a flat 5, though.
And that's so different, right? 6.5 down the hill compared to flat 5. They play so different. I mean, if you're a 5 furlong turf horse, then the 5 and the 5.5s are usually good for you. But for the horses that like the 6.5, they're usually horses that maybe are even more like milers, cutting back, having a little bit more bottom. So I completely respect Big Invasion, and I think from a conversation standpoint, you probably have to start it with him. He was last year's Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint runner-up, as you pointed out. He was only beaten a neck. It's a little disappointing for a stretch of races this year, a couple in a row, but then he did get back into form in his last few, in particular in the Harvey Pack. So that was a really nice bounce-back performance, but he is one of those horses that I wonder, Is he a better horse at, 5.5, like a late running horse who wants to make that little quick burst? Will he have that same turn of foot going 6.5 where it's a little bit longer?
Yeah, and I think it's also you mentioned, in the last race about having a plan. And one of the things about Christophe Clement is I know Christophe has a plan. And I would imagine winning the Eddie D stakes, as much as nice as it would be, might not actually be the plan. As much as let's get this horse out to Southern California, let's get him used to running a little bit out there, get his body acclimated to it, and just get ready basically for the turf sprint at Del Mar. So in many ways, this I think I'm not going to say that they're not using this as an opportunity to win. I'm sure they are, but I think as much as anything, it's about getting out there, getting a race in Southern California, getting one under the belt, and then really being geared up and ready to go for that turf sprint, which is going to be a lot shorter, obviously, and flat at Del Mar. So really fitting his style a little bit more. And yeah, I'm kind of with you on, I'm going to look past this horse in this particular race I'm going to be playing against, because you mentioned it took a little while for him to get kind of back up to speed, quite frankly, this year, and is not one that I'm overly interested in playing. Now, one of the horses that has had a little bit of success on the downhill is a horse like First Piece for Mark Glatt, who I think is a little bit interesting. And you mentioned this is a horse that kind of also runs the mile and will sometimes cut back to the 6.5. Horse is 5 for 5 in the exacta at the 6.5 distance. So clearly likes this distance quite a bit, only has 2 wins, but has a little bit of talent. And, Gino, another thing I'll just kind of throw out to you is you've watched these downhill races a lot. I know you're sometimes not a big fan of that inside post position for a horse like Johnny Padres, and maybe, that could be a little bit detrimental to him.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially because down the hill, the way it's a really unique turf course. It sort of is like down and then it turns. So being drawn to the outside is not bad down the hill. Yeah. It's actually kind of beneficial. It's the inside that sort of forces you a little bit. And so a horse like Padres, he may have to go take way, way back and kind of angle around. Might not be the best for him. You're mentioning First Piece, though. He's a top tier contender in here. No doubt about it. His race in the Del Mar Mile, when he was actually favored in that race, he had a no chance trip as well. Just really, really wide all the way around. He moved up to the within about a couple lengths from the outside, but he was just flat because that wide trip ended up catching up with him. And he was wide chasing a lone speed winner that day as well. So he was wide. The race didn't shape up for him. I think he'll have a lot better of an opportunity here cutting back. He's major player in here. I mean, I think with the purse bump, that's sort of what they were hoping to lure a horse like Big Invasion out here. This was a race I think they've run for like 200 to 300,000 in purses the last couple of years, and now it's up to 750,000. So that bigger purse gets a couple extra horses out here, maybe like an Iman, Fast Buck, Big Invasion. We see a few of them, and when you're looking at a downhill race, you're going to see some horses that are a little bit quirky that have some good early speed. I think that's the case with Noble Reflection, who's really fast. And a good hill horse is Air Force Red. He is a horse who, with his running style, he's really fast. He doesn't really want to take a hold, grab a hold and take back. But if he can sit just off horses going down the hill and running naturally, that's sort of the perfect trip for him. So he is definitely going to be in my pick 4s or pick 5s, Air Force Red. First Piece is like a top tier contender for me too.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Air Force Red gets Juan Hernandez up, and we all know JJ is one of the best at speed rider. When you put him on a speed horse, he's going to get out there and he's going to go. This horse coming off a win last time out with him aboard. Now that was against $100,000 allowance optional claiming company and going 1 mile and a 16th, which shows just that additional foundation that you so like to see out of those 6.5 furlong races. This is a horse that's 4 for 7 winning at the downhill distance. So very capable over this downhill turf course. I agree. I mean, he's one that I'm absolutely looking at in this spot. And it's going to be interesting, like I said, to see how this plays out. First Piece, another one that will be on all of my tickets. Now let's move on to the California Crown Grade 1, going 1 mile and an 1/8 for 3-year-olds and up on the dirt. And this is only a 7-horse field, but it's an interesting field nonetheless because there's some really big names. People, of course, are going to be drawn to National Treasure. They're going to be drawn to Muth, 2 of the Bob Baffert runners. Newgate, the other one, making his first starts in North America since running over the Middle East, feels a little bit more like a toss to me in this particular spot. But National Treasure and Muth, these are two horses that have great early speed. And National Treasure coming off a disappointing effort in the Whitney, though you can draw a line through it, over a muddy track. He's never in his career run well over a wet surface. So you can maybe make an excuse there. He also tends to be a completely different horse when he gets on the lead or can sit second. And when he does that, he can be pretty dangerous. Muth has a little bit more variability. He can sit a little bit further back. He's shown you a little bit more ability to rate, sit third, fourth before moving. Another one never finished out of the exacta in his career. Incredibly impressive horse, but maybe not the elite level speed figures that you might expect to see from a grade one horse on the dirt going 2 turns. I teased this earlier. I know you're very high on Subsanador, who I got to say, that was like the easiest angle last time out. Richard Mandela shipping across the country, just automatic throw it all on that horse because he never does that when he won at Monmouth. But this is a really nice horse.
Yeah. And the Baffert runners, all 3 of them, they're all 3 grade 1 winners, but I think they all have knocks for separate reasons. Like you were kind of getting at National Treasure. We can put a line through that last race, most likely, because it was on an off track, but we still have to keep in mind, he didn't fire last time out. And I think at 1 1/8, he's 1 for 5. So he really is better at a mile. Can he get 1 1/8? Absolutely. He's gotten it and he's won big races. He won the Pegasus earlier this year. He won the Preakness last year going farther than 1 1/8. But he's at his best right at about a mile, right about there. That's where he's at top of his game. You have Muth, who has had some hiccups throughout the year. Muth was supposed to run in the Preakness. Muth was supposed to run multiple times in different spots that would have to get scratched. He would get backed up. They were going to run maybe in the Pacific Classic. They picked a much softer spot in the shared belief for him. So now, while I respect everything we've seen from Muth, this is his first start against older horses. Also, so he's never faced older horses like this. And then Newgate, he has not run since Dubai. I will say, though, you can watch some of these horses work out in the mornings on XB TV. Newgate on September 21st absolutely dusted Prince of Monaco, just put him away in the morning. Like, I was like, whoa. And Newgate isn't even that type of a workhorse.
He's not.
Just visually really impressive. But I do think all 3 of them have some knocks for those reasons. And then you get to Senor Buscador, who's the other grade 1 winner. Awesome year for him. He was in all the biggest races, the Pegasus World Cup. He was in the Saudi Cup. He went to Dubai, ran well in all those races. And with him, what's nice is you can see his pattern. His most recent start, it was his first start back after a few months off. They put him in a sprint race just as a fitness builder to set him up well for this race and then for the Breeders' Cup. I still get a little worried about him in a small field like this, though. When you have 3 Baffert horses who 2 of them will probably be forwardly placed, and I don't think they're going to be pushing each other. Right. So now I'm a little bit worried about the way it shapes up for Senor Buscador. I think when you going to go through the field like that, you can start eliminating some horses, and you just get to Subsanador, who really feels like this is a good spot for him at the right time. Knowing this horse personally, Matt, when he came to the U.S., at the end of 2023, he raced on opening day at Santa Anita in the San Antonio, and he was actually favored in that race because there wasn't really any top-tier older horses in that in the division and in that spot at the time. But Subsanador was behind in his training. That was a real race to just get a race under him. And then he was off for a couple months. He showed back up in the big cap. He ran a great race in the big cap, and then he switched barns. I just feel like now, making his 3rd start for Mandela, I feel like they've figured him out right now, and he's going to be at his absolute best that we've seen from him.
Yeah, listen, he's, in my opinion, depending on the price, he's the bet of the race because you get big money Mike Smith up on the mount. Mandela places his horses very carefully. He feels like a horse that's going to get the exact right trip, likely sitting just behind National Treasure and Muth and not giving himself too much to do, which is always the issue with a horse like Senor Buscador. It's interesting. We're recording this on Wednesday. we watched, well, at least I watched, and you might have been still asleep, although you don't sleep much. So maybe you were watching, maybe you were watching Ushba Tesoro earlier today over in the Nippon TV High, but that's a horse that is much like Senor Buscador, a big, deep closer. And what did we see happen in that Japanese prep race? A horse shook free on the front end, and Ushba couldn't really make up all that ground until it was too late. So I always worry about that with Senor Buscador. He can get there, but he needs the exact right setup. I actually think the races in Saudi always set up well for him because it's a one-turn setup,
which I think is long stretch.
That huge stretch, and you get much faster paces in a one-turn race, and so you can sit behind that and then make that big, huge sweeping run. And so I always think he's going to do his best over there. But it is one of those things where I agree with you. I think you can draw a line through some of those Baffert runners, and then you end up on Subsanador, who I think is going to provide great value and is a horse who has run some very big numbers if you're going to be following buyer speed figures. Now, one of the things I will say about Muth, and I agree with you, it was pretty notable that they brought him back in the shared belief after this long of a layoff rather than moving him to the Pacific Classic. But I will say they went fast that day early, and they went fast even by Southern California standards. When you're going 22-2 and 45-4 for a mile at Del Mar, I mean, you are flying. Now that the pace slowed down a little bit as a result, but for him to be able to sit and press that fast of a pace and then just put everybody away basically at the end and win pretty comfortably was impressive. But that said, you're right. First time against olders is usually an angle I'm playing against. And, it just feels like I just don't know how good he can be. I think this is another one where this might be a race to kind of get him ready, because now the third start is going to be that Breeders' Cup Classic in all likelihood. And that's where he's going to potentially peak for Baffert.
And he could be a really interesting horse in a dirt mile situation too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Right? If they came up a little short here and it seems like, maybe he's not really as much of a 1.25 mile horse. I think that's a really interesting point for a few horses in here. Like Subsanador, for example. Most of his good work came at a mile in Argentina before coming over to the U.S. Right. And then he ran a really good race going 1.25 miles in the big cap. But the 1.125 miles might be perfect for him, like this trip right here. And if he's a little short at this trip, maybe they do cut him back and maybe he's a horse they go in the dirt mile with. Look at a spot like that. Yeah. But I do think for him too, the distance-wise is perfect. And for Muth, so are we saying National Treasure's on the lead, Muth kind of sitting behind? You think that's the way Baffert will go with his two horses?
That's what I would imagine. I think so too. National Treasure seems like National Treasure needs the lead more than Muth needs the lead. Muth
I agree with that.
Very comfortable rating.
Yep.
National Treasure's only showed he can rate really once when it was.
He doesn't really want to pass horses. Yeah, no, much at all.
That's always been his thing. He's always very one-paced. I mean, even going back and looking at his 2-year-old races, if he kind of breaks third, he finishes third, kind of a horse. And so the way to negate a one-paced horse is just to put him up on the lead, and then you don't have to worry about passing anyone. And so, that's always kind of been his MO. So I'd imagine he's going to gun it straight for the front. Muth's going to sit off. And like I said, Subsanador should sit that kind of pocket trip, quite frankly, just behind those two. So going to be interesting. And even National Treasure, obviously, if you remember last year in the Breeders' Cup mile, dirt mile, I should say, nearly upsetting Cody's Wish. To your point, always been a little bit better going shorter.
Yep.
And will be interesting to see where Baffert decides to put him, because now you have a horse like Seize the Gray, who I just saw win the Pennsylvania Derby last week. Sounds like D. Wayne is pointing that horse towards the dirt mile. It's going to be interesting to see kind of the musical chairs taking place of who's going to want to go where in those two races between the Classic and the dirt mile.
Yep. And, you think about horses that are speedy horses too, that are out there in the ether, like an Arthur's Ride or others that may just add pace to what could be a Breeders' Cup Classic situation. So it's funny, last year in this race, National Treasure was 4th, Senor Buscador was 3rd. And National Treasure didn't really fire. Like, he was tailing off. He was not in the best stretch of his career at that point. After winning the Preakness, he threw in a couple of clunkers, but that cut back to the dirt mile. And then we saw him take a step forward from 3 to 4, which doesn't happen with a lot of horses. And I know this is something that you point out. That's why it's so cool when we see horses be able to hang around after 3, because sometimes you'll see,
God forbid, Gino,
happen, right? All of a sudden This horse has gotten better at 4. He has 2 grade 1 wins. His speed figures are much better and faster than he was running, early on last year in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile and then on into 4. So it is cool when we get to see horses that were good at 3 come back and can be even better at 4 and 5.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of some older horses, let's talk about this last race in the 4-race sequence of graded stakes races, and that is the City of Hope Mile, grade 2, going a mile for 3-year-olds and up on the turf. And this one's pretty interesting because I think a horse like Johannes for Tim Yakteen just so good.
Awesome.
It's so impressive by him. But I have to say, I'm also interested. We talked about a 3-year-old taking on older horses. Well, we got the number 6, Trickery, for Graham Motion, coming out here to the West Coast. Again, Graham having a plan, wanted to get this horse facing older next time, wanted this horse to kind of get some experience. He's done something similar in the past in terms of bringing horses out to Santa Anita to get them a little bit of experience with younger horses. But Trickery really has proven to be the top 3-year-old turf horse at this point in the country and is now going to be taking on olders. I'm interested in your perspective on this one, whether this is a race where maybe you're going a little skinny or you're trying to beat some more logical choices.
Yeah, totally respect Johannes. You also have the top 4 finishers from the Del Mar Mile. That wasn't probably quite as strong because Johannes wasn't in that race. Johannes would have definitely been, the horse to beat in there. Tricari, really, really cool. I mean, you look at the entire body of work on the turf. This horse is 2 necks away from a couple necks away from like being undefeated. Yeah. I mean, you're looking at a horse who just never throws a bad race in. Everything in the last 6 months. So the debut on the turf wasn't good. That last stretch of races basically have been incredible. And he gets better and better. What I like particularly about him is his running style. He puts himself in the race. He's able to sit really close or within a couple lengths, get the jump on some of the deeper horses. He's very honest. He fights back. I really have no knocks on him overall as a horse. It would just be, in this race with his running style where he wants to sit close, it actually could be a little different than the Del Mar Mile, because if you had at him on top of Conclude, who we know is going to go, I wouldn't be shocked to see Astronomer trying to make sure Conclude is, pressed a little bit here. And then the key is having horses like Johannes and Chikari, who are really naturally fast pressers that could just be not too far behind Conclude, just sort of keeping this horse really honest. So I think they'll be going much more of a fair early pace in here. So I think it does open it up for a couple of the closers. One horse that I'm a little interested in, and I will throw in pick 4s, pick 5s and stuff, is Almendaris. Mainly because, I've followed Almendaris for a while, and he's a horse who is a little bit more of a deeper closer, and he does get caught in, he has some unlucky trips because of that. If you've been following along with him, he's a horse that you could probably make excuses for a few different times. And then in his last race in the Del Mar Mile, that race didn't shape up for him at all. And he almost ran down loose on the lead Conclude. So he's really in nice form right now. And if you look at his pattern, he actually had some legitimate trouble on July the 21st. And he stretched back out from 6.5 to a mile that day. So the Del Mar Mile was his 3rd start back of the form cycle. I think he's just really in nice form right now. And I'm definitely going to be including him in the mix.
Yeah, he really looks to be, we'll have to see what the prices end up being, but the likelihood he's going to end up being my top choice because he also picks up Flavian Pratt on the mount. And few ride the turf better than Flavian right now. We saw that this summer up at Saratoga. We've seen this out west. You saw this up close and personal out west for a long time. But, Pratt is just so good on the turf, and I feel like he's, become such a good finisher as well in a lot of these races. To your point, this is a horse that just has shown a continued improvement over the course of the year. And you're right. The fractions for Southern California standards were pretty moderate when Conclude won that race in the Del Mar Mile last time out. So now you get Pratt on the mount and you get a horse that should get a little bit more pace to run into. I think Almendaris makes a lot of sense in this spot. Conclude unlikely to get that same sort of relatively easy lead this time around because you do have a couple of other horses that like to be close. Even a horse like Paxawala.
He's the real key because he could really make it tough for Conclude. And if Paxawallop is up close with Conclude, and then you see, Johannes and Trickery really close pressing, that's probably going to be difficult for Conclude, especially from out wide. If he's having to go a little bit faster to just sort of establish that lead. So yeah, I think it's going to shape up a little different for him. The one horse I want to at least mention with you back and forth, Matt, a little bit is Easter. Because he had a really good stretch for a few months earlier in the year where he won 3 races in a row, including back-to-back graded stakes races out here. But I do think those were a little softer. We saw him beat a horse like Balnikov, who's a nice horse, who we just pointed out a little earlier. I think overall, those races were a little bit softer. And then when he stepped up and faced, De Jour and Johannes, he was a bit overmatched. But I mean, the Shoemaker Mile was a really strong race. If you go back and look at that one, Fantastic again ran huge. There were a bunch of grade 1 winners. I think Goliad was at the back of that pack. So he's a horse who I keep I'm hemming and hawing with, because I could see him float up a little bit and become playable. Like Johannes is going to take some money. Trickery will take some money. Probably the 2 outside horses take some money. There could be worlds where Easter is the 5th or 6th choice in here. Then all of a sudden you can start talking yourself into including him, because at least he has a ceiling that's not far off. He can throw up 100 by your speed figure. So on his best day, that puts him really close to winning a race like this.
No, absolutely. You're absolutely right. And the other thing we should mention is Johannes is coming off a very brief layoff, to basically a 2-month layoff, but we've seen him, in very good form this year, winning a grade 3, winning a grade 2, winning a grade 1 in his last 3 starts. But, I think it is fair to kind of say, just kind of interested to see the level of competition and kind of how he ends up in the sort of trip that Umberto Rispoli carves out for him. Because again, with Paxawallop going, with Conclude going, with Trickery pressing, maybe you mentioned Astronomer potentially trying to press the pace a little bit. Does that just kind of burn him out a little bit in general? We'll have to wait and see, but he's going to be a pretty short price. So listen, if you're including him, then I would not obviously tell you to include many other horses on your ticket. But if you think you can beat him, then I think, we talked about a few horses to potentially consider at a little bit of a price. And we should mention, we talked about Bob Baffert and the California Crown, but listen, De Jour is also a nice horse who's got races to run back to on the inside. And we don't think of, this is kind of the lone Baffert turf horse, I always feel like, that people forget is a Baffert horse. But De Jour's a nice horse who's won some big races in the past and has a pretty good record at Santa Anita as well. So gets JJ Hernandez up on the mount. And this is another one who's a little bit more of a deep closer and probably is going to let them kind of run out ahead and is going to be on the rail saving ground from a little further back. And if Hernandez can find a seam on the rail or something like that, could get the right sort of trip coming from off the pace.
I was funny because looking back at his race, I thought he ran poorly in his last race. And that a horse has a high ceiling when they were only beaten 3/4 of a length with a 99 buyer speed figure, and you felt like they ran poorly. Like it was one of those things where I was like, wow, his race really was not that bad. I think it might have been that I had him that day, in the gambler perspective, where you're like, man, he wasn't even close. But he really wasn't beaten that much. And he was chasing a lone speed winner that day. Another horse who didn't get the shape. If you're projecting this race to have a little more pace as we are, those horses have a better chance in this race.
Absolutely. Well, listen, Gino, thanks so much for joining me again. Really appreciate your time helping me out, talking about these races at Santa Anita. For the folks listening at home, let them know where you can find you, what you got going on this weekend, because you're going to be out there on site, if I'm not mistaken, for Saturday.
Yeah, looking forward to it. I'll probably be out Thursday, where there's the day before the races start, doing some videos and promotional stuff. Friday's opening day, and then Saturday is the big day. Everything that you need for that big day, go to CaliforniaCrown.com. I'll be doing a bunch of stuff for Daily Racing Form if you want to follow them on social media. We're actually giving away over the next couple of days a bunch of free general admission tickets too to Santa Anita for that day. And we're the questions and the contest that we're asking, they're really simple. We're just asking you about like your favorite horses at Santa Anita or who you like in this race. Nothing that's that difficult. We just want to get your responses. We just want to hear back from you, and we want to send you some tickets to head on out there. So that's what G Said Podcast, anywhere you get your podcast, or on YouTube, subscribe over there. And there's also a big wagering contest First Bet has the California Crown betting challenge, and it's a really big entry fee. It's $6,000 to enter. That's a lot of money. I'm sure a lot of people can't afford that. But on Friday, there's a $300 contest where you could win your entry. So that is a much more affordable way to win your spot into a $6,000 contest where you could be playing for BCBC, NHC seats, hundreds and thousands of dollars in possible prizes. So, man, it's going to be a blast this weekend, Maddie. I'm excited. And Santa Anita's really been trying to make this a big day. The fields are good. Most importantly, that's the most important thing. We have good betting opportunities, some big fields, some solid wagering opportunities with low takeout. So the gamblers aren't going to be, the ones that are getting poked and prodded on a big day like this. We're actually going to have some nice wagers to play. So anytime you give me a call, man, I will move anything around for you. You know that, my friend.
I appreciate it, Gino. Hardest working man in horse racing, and definitely make sure to check out all the content Gino's turning out all the time, not just about horse racing, but just about everything under the sun, quite frankly. So, Gino, always appreciate your time. Thank you so much. For Gino Buccola, my name is Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and prosperous day at the races, and reminding you, friends, it's now post time.